What would you do if your boss mocked your wife, called her trash, right to her face, not knowing she owned the entire company? This isn't a story about revenge. It's a story about what happens when people judge power by clothing, by skin color, by silence. But today, silence fights back. Because one woman walked into her job like any other day, only to be humiliated in front of the entire office. And just when they thought they'd broken her, the elevator dinged. And the man who stepped out didn't come to argue. He came to the end career. Stick around, because by the end of this story, you won't just be watching a takedown. You'll witness a transformation that will change how you see power forever. Have you ever watched someone walk into a room and immediately felt everything shift, even when no one else noticed? That was Amara Hill. She didn't storm through the doors or command attention with noise. She simply stepped into the lobby of Stratton & Chase Global, wearing a soft gray blouse, neatly pressed black trousers, and a quiet confidence that dared the room to underestimate her. Her dark skin glowed in the morning sun, slicing through the glass walls. Her tightly coiled hair was pulled into a neat low bun. Her face was bare except for a subtle gloss, and her only accessory was a small leather-bound notebook tucked under her arm. The reception area, all chrome edges and tension-soaked silence, was already buzzing with the caffeine-fueled shuffle of a Monday morning. Phones rang, shoes clicked, executives murmured behind frosted doors. No one looked up. No one except the security guard, who glanced at her shoes, well kept, but clearly unbranded, and then at her badge. Intern, assistant, mailroom. She nodded at him politely, unfazed by the weight of his scan, then made her way to the elevator with measured grace. Upstairs, the 34th floor was an entirely different world. White marble flooring, coffee machines that steamed like small dragons, and an open-plan office humming with a type of curated coldness only found in corporate temples. Here, names meant nothing unless printed on a door. Faces mattered only when attached to budgets. And clothing? Clothing was code. Amara stepped out and was greeted by a momentary silence, like the floor had drawn a collective breath, uncertain how to exhale. Her colleagues, sharply dressed in sleek pastels and blinding whites, gave her the kind of look people pretend isn't racist. Just curious, just assessing. She was beautiful, yes, but not in the kind of way that made people lean in. Her beauty was layered, statuesque and deliberate, like it came from knowing exactly who she was. But in this space, confidence without a title was dangerous. "Oh, are you the new admin for finance?" a woman asked, sipping her turmeric latte without looking away from her screen. "No," Amara replied gently. "I'm the senior systems strategist. I believe I'm in your department." The woman blinked slowly, lips parting just slightly before she forced a thin smile and muttered, "Right. Welcome." But the tone had been set. Throughout the day, Amara noticed the small things, the way people introduced themselves to each other, but skipped her. The jokes were shared just out of earshot. The meetings she was invited to, only to be ignored once inside. She had seen this before. Not just the microaggressions, but the architecture of exclusion. It was designed like a luxury apartment, clean, sophisticated, and utterly impersonal. And Amara, with her sharp mind and gentle strength, was a mirror they didn't want to look into. She spent most of her morning reviewing the outdated systems she'd been hired to rebuild. The code was a mess, sloppy, fragmented, inefficient, but no one wanted to hear that from her. At noon, she asked a junior tech if there was a shared lunchroom. The girl looked up, startled, then pointed vaguely toward the back, saying, Most of us order in. In the lunchroom, Amara sat alone. Her neatly packed meal, quinoa, roasted vegetables, a thermos of tea, quietly steaming as she reviewed notes. A few employees walked in, saw her, and immediately redirected elsewhere. But she didn't flinch. She chewed slowly, gracefully, like she knew that even a bite of silence could taste like dignity. She didn't know it yet, but someone had already taken a photo. Just her, alone at the table. A caption followed. New hire or new hire's assistant? Can't tell. It spread quietly through Slack. The first match dropped into dry grass. By midweek, the temperature in the office had changed. Not the air conditioning, but the social climate, the invisible chill that settled into the corners of Amara's workspace like mold. It wasn't just the glances anymore. It was the patterns. Conversations stopped when she walked past. Jokes took on a coded language. Her questions in meetings were met with polite head tilts and long pauses that said, "Let the real experts speak." Her ideas, when echoed by others with lighter skin or more expensive shoes, suddenly became brilliant. But she took it in, absorbed it like breath, and kept building. She wasn't here to be liked. She was here to rebuild a system, and she knew systems. Still, even the strongest woman begins to fray when the disrespect becomes ritual. On Thursday, the email came. Subject line: Redundancy Review System Strategy Department. Amara clicked it, her fingers stilling as she read. They were re-evaluating her role, effective immediately pending review. No explanation, no meeting, no forewarning. Just a form letter, written by someone who probably hadn't bothered to learn how to pronounce her name. She stood, stunned for a breath, before walking to the director's office. Darius Kemp, the man who had once praised her resume as a breath of fresh air, now stared at her like she was a smudge on glass. "It's not personal," he said, his voice oily with corporate detachment. "We're just tightening things. The team feels your contributions haven't aligned with the culture here." Culture. That word again. Code for whiteness dressed in HR compliance. "I've redesigned 3 core infrastructure models this week alone," Amara said, her voice quiet but firm. "Your current system couldn't sustain for another 6 months." Darius leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled, smiling with something like pity. "But how you do things matters here too. There's a tone to consider." Behind her, 2 women watched from glass walls, pretending not to listen. One of them, Elise, wore a smirk she didn't bother to hide. Amara turned without a word and returned to her desk, where a small group had already gathered. "I told you," one whispered, loud enough for her to hear. She always had that vibe. Too proud. Too, you know. She thought being smart would save her. Another chuckled. Her locker had been emptied. Her name tag was removed. A sticky note on her monitor read, "No longer active." That afternoon, Amara was told she'd be escorted out by security. Vince, the guard who barely acknowledged her each morning, now walked behind her with hollow authority. She didn't cry. She didn't tremble. But the hallway grew impossibly long. Her colleagues, those who had smiled during orientation, those who'd ignored her elevator greetings, stood frozen. Not one of them stepped forward. Not one offered a word. Except Elise. As Amara reached the door, Elise called out across the office, her voice mocking and sharp. "Hey, you forgot your little notebook. Maybe you can use it to write about how corporate life isn't for everyone." Laughter rippled. One man coughed into his fist, trying to cover it. Another rolled his eyes. "She'll probably sue." And then, as if punctuating the final humiliation, someone tossed a ball of paper that bounced against her back. Amara stopped. For 1 second, she stood still, the insult resting like heat between her shoulder blades. She turned slowly, eyes scanning the room, not with anger, but with a quiet, chilling calm. She didn't say a word. She simply gave one last look, a glance that seemed to say, "You don't know what's coming, do you?" And then she walked out, the world behind her smug, hollow, and laughing. But the storm hadn't even started yet. The next morning was supposed to be a quiet one. Amara walked into the office lobby not to beg, not to protest, but to retrieve her favorite pen, left behind in a drawer of the desk that now belonged to someone else. But the moment the security camera caught her figure in that same, simple navy blouse and tailored pants, the front desk receptionist pressed a button under her desk like a reflex. Within seconds, Vince appeared again, the same guard from yesterday, only now with a voice loud enough to cut through the marble lobby. "Ma'am, you can't be here," he barked, drawing the attention of everyone within earshot. Amara blinked, stunned. "I'm just here to—" "You've been terminated," he snapped. "Return visits without appointment are not permitted." She opened her mouth to explain, but a second voice cut in. Elise. She had spotted the scene from the mezzanine and descended with the smug grace of someone ready to twist the knife. "Seriously?" she called out, heels clicking. "She's back? Someone get HR before she starts a scene." A few employees gathered, drawn by the noise, their eyes wide with the kind of hunger that always swirls around humiliation. Elise kept going, her voice projecting for maximum reach. "This is exactly what I meant in the meeting yesterday. Unprofessionalism. She was disruptive, remember? Always bringing up equity and diversity, like it was her job." Another woman whispered to her coworker, "I heard she called someone racist last month. She plays that card a lot." "Right?" Elise laughed. "If this is about her being black, then what about Darius? He's black and he fits in just fine." The word black cracked through the air like a whip, and suddenly it wasn't just workplace drama. It was performance. Public degradation. Vince gestured toward the exit again, but Amara remained frozen, as if watching someone else's nightmare unfold in slow motion. A middle-aged man in a tailored gray suit, someone from legal, she remembered vaguely, crossed his arms and muttered, "She's lucky we don't call the cops. This is trespassing." Then Elise dropped the final blow, one hand on her hip, eyes cold. Maybe she thinks she's still married to that imaginary billionaire she mentioned during that coffee break. Remember? Her mystery husband. Must be nice to invent things when you're irrelevant. The lobby erupted into polite, shocked laughter. Amara's throat tightened, not with tears, but with fury choked back so deep it felt physical. The receptionist was filming now. Another intern held up her phone for Instagram. Comments rolled in beneath the live stream. Another crazy ex-employee trying to stay relevant. Who wears flats to a corporate job anyway? Tell her to apply at Starbucks. Someone yelled from the back, "Yo, what's her OnlyFans?" That's when Vince stepped forward again. "Ma'am, I need you to leave now, or I'll have to remove you." But Amara didn't move. Not yet. Her eyes scanned the room, taking in every smirking face, every barely hidden chuckle. And then, for one breathless moment, she whispered, "You think I'm alone?" Elise tilted her head with mock confusion, and the others laughed again. "Yeah," she said. "You walked in here solo, sweetheart, like always." Amara gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. "Wait for it," she said. That's when the front doors of the building blew open with the mechanical hum of a security override, and 3 black SUVs pulled up to the front steps. The double glass doors swung wide before anyone inside could react, and silence dropped like a guillotine blade as the polished Oxfords of three men echoed across the marble floor, flanked by security in black suits and mirrored sunglasses that didn't belong in a corporate building unless something seismic was about to happen. At the center of the formation, tall, sharp-jawed, and composed like a storm waiting to strike, walked a man who didn't look like he belonged here. Not because he wasn't powerful, but because he looked like he owned too much power to waste time with people like these. His name was Langston Ford, and even before the receptionist could whisper, "Oh my God," even before Vince stiffened and Elise's smugness cracked into confusion, Amara whispered his name under her breath, like it was a secret she no longer had to keep. Langston's eyes swept the room and stopped the moment they found her. He didn't rush, didn't shout, didn't need to. He simply walked straight to her, placed one hand gently on the small of her back, and kissed her forehead with a reverence that shattered the performance around them like glass. Elise blinked twice, her voice faltering as she whispered to a co-worker, "Wait, that's not. No, that can't be him." Langston turned, his voice low and clear, smooth like silk wrapped around steel. "Is there a reason my wife is being harassed in a building my company owns?" Murmurs ignited like sparks in a dry field, the receptionist lowering her phone, the security guard straightening his spine, and Elise's mouth opening, but no sound coming out. Bradley, the regional manager, appeared around the corner with a practiced corporate smile. "Sir, I wasn't informed of your visit." Langston cut him off with a glance. "That's obvious." He turned to Vince. "You put your hands on my wife?" Vince took a step back, mouth dry, words failing. "I didn't know, sir. She didn't say." "She shouldn't have to," Langston said, his tone a scalpel. Elise tried to recover, stepping forward with forced sweetness. "Mr. Ford, we didn't know who she was. You understand how appearances can be misleading?" Langston looked at her the way a lion looks at a gazelle pretending it's not already bleeding. "And what exactly did her appearance tell you? That she wasn't worthy of basic respect?" Elise's lip twitched, her facade crumbling. "We thought she was lying," she said flatly, "about being married to someone important." Langston's smile was cold. "Oh, I see. You judged her because she didn't look like what you expected from power. Because she's black. Because she's simple. Because she dared to exist here without permission. You mocked my wife while working in a company under my holding portfolio. This building is part of Ford Urban Equity, a division under Ford Global, which I chair." A gasp cut through the lobby as the elevator doors dinged open, and a new figure appeared. Mr. Hamilton, the division director, red-faced, breathless, rushing toward the scene with panic behind his eyes. "Mr. Ford, sir, Don't," Langston said without turning. "Don't pretend you knew. You stood by while your team humiliated my wife. You didn't recognize her, and you didn't recognize me. And now you will recognize the consequences." Elise whispered to Bradley, "This can't be happening." But it was, and it wasn't over. Langston pulled out his phone and made one call. Only one. "Clara, begin the review. Start with every name on the team who was present today. I want HR termination packages reviewed by 3 p.m. Then he looked up. "Actually, start with leadership. I expect their desks to be cleared by the end of lunch." Bradley went pale. "Sir, please, I was just following protocol." "No," Langston said. "You were following bias." He turned to Amara, brushing a curl from her cheek, his voice gentler. "Let's get out of here." But she didn't move. Not yet. Because there was one more thing to say. She turned to Elise, to Vince, to every face frozen in fear and regret. I was always enough, she said softly. You just never looked close enough to see it. And then, with Langston's arm around her, they walked out. Not in defeat, not in protest, but in power that didn't need to scream to be felt. The fallout wasn't loud at first. It was quiet, surgical, and terrifying in its precision. By the time Langston and Amara's car pulled out of the underground garage, a memo had already reached corporate HR. And by noon, desks were being cleared, badges deactivated, and emails frozen. Elise sat frozen at her desk, her fingers limp over a keyboard that no longer recognized her login. Her inbox had vanished. Her name badge was removed by the head of security, who couldn't meet her eyes. She tried to call Bradley, but his line rang to voicemail, because Bradley was in the HR conference room with the door locked from the inside, his palms sweaty as the termination documents printed one by one, each page a reckoning for every smirk, every insult, every unchecked act of cruelty. HR didn't blink. Bias training is no longer sufficient, the VP said flatly. This is cultural rot, and the chairman wants it excised completely. Bradley stammered, offered apologies, and tried to explain away his judgment. I thought she was just a random applicant, he pleaded. I didn't know. That's exactly the problem. The HR lead snapped. You only know how to respect people once they're holding a sword over your head. Elise's voice cracked as she begged for another chance, but the system had already logged her termination. She was escorted out the same way she had watched Amara be walked toward the exit. Except this time, there was no crowd laughing, no audience clapping, only silence and shame. News of the incident leaked within 24 hours. Langston hadn't needed to say a word. Someone inside the company had shared the footage, the audio, the still image of Amara standing alone while 5 people towered over her in mockery. The internet did the rest. A trending hashtag, a storm of outrage, and a tidal wave of support for Amara. This is what women of color go through every day, one user wrote. They don't look like power, so people think they have none. A former intern commented, I remember Elise mocking me for my accent. I quit after 2 weeks. Amara didn't deserve that. No one does. The story became national. Morning shows, opinion columns, corporate accountability panels, and Langston's next move made headlines around the world. In a press conference outside the Ford Global headquarters, he stood at the podium with Amara by his side, her hand in his, and announced, effective immediately, this subsidiary will undergo full restructuring. A new leadership team will be formed with a focus on inclusion, respect, and dignity. Not because of who Amara is to me, but because of who she is in her own right. No one should have to wear wealth or fame to be treated with basic decency. The crowd cheered, and that moment rippled farther than anyone could have imagined. 2 weeks later, in a small office in Atlanta, a young black woman named Jada watched the clip during her lunch break. She had been quietly mocked at her job for how she wore her natural curls, for the way she spoke with soft southern vowels, for the modest cardigans she thrifted on weekends. But after seeing Amara's story, Jada stood up to her supervisor when he called her low energy. She filed a report. HR took it seriously, because now companies were watching, boards were reviewing, policies were changing. People had seen what happened when injustice met power, and power chose love, not ego. Amara's story became a catalyst, not just a personal victory, but a public one. Because for every woman like her, quiet, brilliant, kind, dismissed, there were millions more waiting for the day the world saw them for who they really were. Not after they were humiliated, but before. Amara didn't set out to become a movement. She hadn't asked for the spotlight, The trending hashtags, the millions of views, or the column inches that dissected her grace and the quiet fire in her spine. But sometimes, history doesn't wait for permission. It simply finds the one person who refuses to shrink. And that day, in a glass tower built for the proud and the polished, the world saw her. 6 months later, the office was unrecognizable, not just in leadership, but in spirit. There were new murals on the walls, inspired by the strength of underrepresented voices. The recruitment team now worked with historically black colleges and grassroots women's networks. Equity audits became a quarterly norm, not a checkbox. Amara never returned to that job, not because she was above it, but because she knew her purpose had shifted. She co-founded a nonprofit called First Light, named after the morning she walked through those glass doors and reminded the world who she was. First Light offered mentorship, legal advocacy, and a platform for women of color, navigating corporate spaces that too often erased them. The mission wasn't to burn everything down. It was to rebuild, brick by brick, until dignity and excellence didn't have to be worn like armor. And she did it all in her own name, not as the billionaire's wife, but as Amara Hill, speaker, strategist, change agent. There was a quiet moment one evening, as golden light streamed across the hardwood floors of her Brooklyn brownstone. Langston was stirring something on the stove, humming softly. Amara stood by the window, reading a handwritten letter from a young woman named Zara. The final line read, "I used to think I had to change myself to be seen, but you reminded me I could be fully myself and still shine." A tear slipped down Amara's cheek, not out of sorrow, but from the overwhelming, exquisite weight of being understood. That's what legacy is, after all. Not a building with your name on it, not a headline or a billion-dollar empire, but a life that quietly, irrevocably changes the trajectory of others. People no longer whispered when she walked into rooms. They rose. They remembered. Not just the humiliation, but the rise, the reversal, the redemption. And if you ask the world today who Amara Hill is, they'll say she's the woman who reminded us. Power isn't about the suit you wear or the office you hold. It's how you treat the person you think you don't need to impress. So if this story left something in your chest, if it made you angry, or made you cry, or made you feel like maybe, just maybe, the world can be better, then carry it forward. Share it. Speak up. Stand beside someone whose voice has been ignored for too long. Because sometimes the revolution doesn't start with a speech. It starts with a woman in flats, asking for what she's already earned. And when they laugh at her, doubt her, try to drag her down, let them. Because you and I both know now, she's the storm that doesn't need thunder to leave the world changed.